It's 40,000 years ago, and you are not alone on this planet. Not in the way you think of alone. Right now, sharing the same rivers, the same forests, the same herds of migrating deer, there are at least 3 other kinds of human walking around. Not distant relatives, not something that evolved into you. Separate species, thinking, tool-making, fire-building humans, existing at the exact same time as you, on the exact same Earth. Give it a few thousand years, and every single one of them will be gone. You'll be the only one left. Rewind further than that, because this wasn't supposed to happen. For most of the last 2 million years, this planet has never had just one kind of human on it. At various points, there were at least 9 recognized species of hominin coexisting, sometimes several at once, spread from Africa to Europe to the islands of Southeast Asia. This was the normal state of the world for longer than modern humans have existed at all. One planet, multiple humans, none of them wiping the others out. Then, in a window that's a blink of an eye by evolutionary standards, that normal state ended, and it ended everywhere at once. Start with who was actually out there. In Europe and Western Asia, Neanderthals had been established for over 300,000 years. Thick-boned, barrel-chested, with brains as large as yours, and, in some measurements, slightly larger. In Siberia, a group known only from a handful of bone fragments and a single finger bone, the Denisovans, occupied a cave system that bears their name, genetically distinct enough that when their full genome was sequenced in 2010 by a team led by paleogeneticist Svante Pääbo, it forced an entirely new branch onto the human family tree. And on the island of Flores in Indonesia, a tiny population nicknamed the Hobbits, formerly Homo floresiensis, stood barely 3 feet tall and had been isolated there for perhaps 700,000 years, hunting dwarf elephants with stone tools scaled to their own small hands. 3 separate experiments in being human, running in parallel on 3 separate continents. By 40,000 years ago, all 3 are gone, or nearly gone, and modern humans, who arrived in each of these regions relatively recently, are the ones left standing. For a long time, the assumed explanation was simple. We were smarter. We killed them. Case closed. The actual evidence turned out to be a lot stranger than that. Start with the genetics, because this is where the story stopped being simple. In 2010, when Pääbo's team sequenced the Neanderthal genome from bone fragments found in Croatia, they found something nobody expected. Modern humans outside of Africa carry Neanderthal DNA, typically between 1% and 2% of the genome, sometimes more. That number exists if humans and Neanderthals interbred repeatedly over thousands of years in multiple locations, producing children who survived and reproduced. This wasn't a war that ended in extinction. It was, at least partly, a slow absorption. Denisovan DNA shows up too, in populations across Asia and Oceania, with some groups in Papua New Guinea carrying up to 5% Denisovan ancestry, the highest concentration ever found. The cousins didn't simply vanish. Pieces of them are sitting inside you right now, reading this sentence. So, if it wasn't a clean extermination, what actually happened? In 2018, a research team led by paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer analyzed climate data layered against the archaeological record across the final tens of thousands of years of Neanderthal existence in Europe. What they found was a population already under enormous strain before modern humans ever fully arrived. Repeated glacial cycles had fragmented Neanderthal groups into small, isolated pockets, and genetic analysis of late Neanderthal remains shows signs of inbreeding, reduced genetic diversity, populations too small and too scattered to recover from a bad season, let alone a new competitor showing up in their territory. And this competitor had an advantage that had nothing to do with brain size. In 2016, a study comparing Neanderthal and early modern human archaeological sites found a stark difference in something almost nobody expects: trade. Modern human sites contained raw materials, obsidian, seashells, certain stone types that had traveled hundreds of kilometers from their source, evidence of exchange networks stretching across entire regions. Neanderthal sites showed almost none of this. Their materials were almost always local. This matters more than it sounds like it should, because a trade network isn't just an economy, it's a backup system. If your local area has a bad hunting season, a network of distant allies can carry resources, genes, and information in from somewhere else. Neanderthals, as far as the evidence shows, mostly didn't have that. When their local environment turned against them, there was no wider network to catch them. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. Multiple lines of evidence now suggest that Neanderthals weren't cognitively behind at all. They controlled fire, made composite tools, buried their dead, and in 2018, a discovery in Spanish caves found geometric patterns painted on cave walls, dated to at least 64,000 years ago, tens of thousands of years before modern humans arrived in that region, meaning Neanderthals were making symbolic art entirely on their own. The old story, that we outthought them, doesn't hold up well against evidence like that. What seems to have actually mattered was scale and connection. Small, isolated, locally self-sufficient populations, no matter how capable each individual member was, are fragile in a way that large, interconnected trading populations simply aren't. It wasn't a smarter species replacing a dumber one. It was a networked species absorbing and outlasting a scattered one through a mix of climate pressure, competition for the same shrinking resources, and generations of interbreeding that blurred the line between replacement and merger. The Denisovans left even less of a trace, known mostly through DNA and a handful of bone fragments, but the same climate pressures that fragmented Neanderthal populations in Europe were almost certainly working on them across Siberia and Asia at the same time. And on Flores, the Hobbits' isolation, the very thing that let them survive alone on that island for perhaps 700,000 years, may have been exactly what made them unable to withstand the arrival of a new, more connected human population competing for the same limited land. So, here's where that leaves you. For most of the history of the genus Homo, there was never just one kind of human, and there was no rule of nature that guaranteed that would ever change. 3 other species were still walking this planet within the lifespan your own great-great-grandparents would recognize as recent, evolutionarily speaking, and every one of them ended not through some inevitable triumph of the fittest, but through the same brutal combination of a shifting climate, shrinking resources, and one population that happened to be networked widely enough to survive what the others couldn't. You are not the ending of a story where the best species won. You're the only survivor of an experiment that used to run in parallel, and the DNA sitting inside your own cells is the last living evidence that it ever did.